67 was produced by Films Division. It was unlike Miles to Go, which was produced by Sukhdev himself and then later by the Films Division. It was produced by Films Division specially for the Montreal Film Festival. The film was a commemorative showcasing of nations' advances into modernity. The devaluation of currency of 1966, the severe famine of 1966-67, followed by food riots in major cities, overwhelmingly shattered the pride of the state, necessitating a cinematic eulogy funded by the bureaucracy to restore its failing dignity. However, for Sukhdev, India 67 began as a project of self-discovery. Sukhdev recalls in an interview, and I'm quote, "This was going to be an experiment. I'm going to present India to the world and wanted to discover it with a fresh point of view, with an open mind, reacting to things I went along." Unquote. Thus, with a small crew in a car, Sukhdev traveled 15,000 miles and then flew another 10,000 miles, shooting close to about 100,000 feet, 1 lakh feet of 35 mm film, which is like, knowing how documentary is like absolutely just opulent. Yeah, like 1 lakh feet of 30,000 mm, the 35 mm was like a lot of footage. India 67 is a cinematic pilgrimage, a quest for the meaning of a young nation entering into modernity from the confines of pre-modern past through a turbulent period of colonial suppression. It is a documentary that journeys into the heart of a nation 20 years after decolonization. Here, the expedition is not the discovery of is not the discovery like an imperial reconnaissance mission or a voyage into heart of darkness. It is certainly not an exploratory intervention by the state, a customary trope of Films Division bureaucratic narrative. It was a film, or it is a film, in search of a nation's essence as it steps firmly into 20th century modernity, but is still steeped in pre-modern universe. Sukhdev's cinematic journey was not a novel idea. Instead, its root lay in the anti-colonial pilgrimage project made famous by Gandhi and subsequently by Nehru. In 1915, soon after his return to India from South Africa, Gandhi embarked on a countrywide tour of self-discovery on the advice of his political mentor Gopal Krishna Gokhale to understand the diversity of the country before he charted his political intervention. This journey saw its historical iteration with Nehru's 1942 epic, The Discovery of India, a narrative written in Ahmednagar jail in central India, arguing genealogically for independence from an imperial power. Both the journeys by Gandhi and by Nehru were means through which decolonized subjects geographically and chronologically reclaimed territory captured by colonial power. For Gandhi, it was through the terrestrially anointing the subjugated territory with his physical imprint that the project of reclamation was possible. For Nehru, it was through an allegorical voyage into the vagaries of time that the historical legitimacy of independent India could be reinstated. Correspondingly, Sukhdev's India 67 was a metaphoric, spatial, historical journey, not so much of discovery, but more of recovery of a post-colonial nation struggling to reinstate its battered identity in a polarized world. Sukhdev attempts to delineate India's negotiation with modernity and tradition at a very specific historical moment of 1967, when the euphoria and the idealism of independence had given way to a resentment that was slowly building up. Shot in Eastman color, radical for its time, India 67 is devoid of storyline, dialogue, or didactic commentary. Sukhdev claimed that he gave the bureaucratic officers of Films Division just one-page script. In an interview, he asserted, I quote, how can you script for what is essentially going to be your own discovery of India, unquote. The film was a brazen, vanguardist approach that broke all rules of Films Division documentary and emerged as a political poetry of contemporary India, reminiscent of Zega Bartov's Man with the Movie Camera. Through melange of diversely remarkable imagery instilled with a stimulating energy, the film heightens the oscillating juxtaposition of tradition, industrialization, modernity, urban, and rural. India 67 provides an incongruous portrait of country full of paradoxes, contrasts, one monumentally struggling towards modernity but leaving behind a trail of failed promises. The beauty of the film is not that it resurrects for the first time the iconic images of India onto a cinematic documentary, bathing carts, temples, folk musicians, painters, industrial factories, big dams, etc. But it is with a witty sagity and a stout candor that these images are sutured to produce a lyrical portrait of a country that is striving towards modernity, but is sternly gripped by a traditional practice of being. India 67 exploits these different exploits the different forms to create divergence and convergence in a narrative that provocatively resonates with Eisenstein's intellectual montage. I mean, if you know, I won't get into the 3-4 different kinds of montage, but one of the most complex montage that Eisenstein talks about is the intellectual montage, which is what I would argue this film is a great example of. Unlike the agit pop Miles to Go with its shrill political intonation, this is a sophisticated film, a very sophisticated film, employing irony as its structural trope. The critique of the postmodern state is not in its vociferous didactic politics, but in Sukhdev's sardonic and even sarcastic montage. The cinematic technique that Sukhdev adopts is comparable to Miles to Go, that of editing contrasting imagery in sharp rhythmic fashion. However, unlike the monochromatic, disjunctive interplay between dark and grotesque despair of urban poor and bright prosperity of rich in Miles to Go, in India 67, Sukhdev contrast coupling his modernity and tradition. He continues to fluently juggle with narrative montage that accentuate the disruptive disparity between but substitutes the rich and the pure dichotomy with the contradictory congruity of tradition and modernity. The narrative of the film is propelled by the productive tension that Sukhdev creates by manipulating the dialectic dissonance between urban and rural, folk and technological, sacred and industrial. The film, like Miles to Go, begins with the rising sun, but in a sandy desert of Western India, and the camera gently sweeps with the into the desolate wilderness. In the meanders of a Rabari family struggling with their nomadic existence in harsh environment, a snake is beaten to death, and an open earth and a crawling beetle valiantly pushing a mound of sand. These are very, very interesting metaphoric moments in the film that the film begins at. At the outset, the film frames the historicity of the nation, like Nehru's discovery of India within the pre-agrarian pastoral religion of Indian civilization. Soon after, the first sardonic gesture of the film occurs. The camera placidly zooms into a vacant throne in an empty courtyard of Sri Mohan Nagar fortress near Jaisalmer in Rajasthan. On the soundtrack, a ringing telephone is answered in accented English. A voice asks the operator to be connected to His Highness Majesty of Mohangarh. After a brief silence, the operator tersely informs that the name is not listed. Through this allegorical, visual and oral absence of the feudal lord, the film scathingly announces the end of feudalistic rule in India. Also a very shrewd gesture by Sukhdev to Indira Gandhi's plan of abolishing privy purse given to erstwhile royalties in India, eventually passed in Parliament in 1969. The ironic tenor adopted by Sukhdev becomes the tropological leitmotif of the film, occurring throughout the film's strategic moment. For Sukhdev, the ironic trope is strategic because this film, unlike Miles to Go, was produced for Films Division, and he, I guess, could not overtly be critical of the state. The sequence of the dog peeing on a bicycle adjacent to a roadside oval with a Ganesh idol. That was, in a masterful stroke, Sukhdev sardonically gesticulates both to the transportive modernity of bicycle with its liberty potential and the religiosity of an anthropomorphic divinity with its fettered encumbrance. It is this derisive irony, a disdainful both to the surging modernity of a post-colonial nation and the turgidity of traditional religiosity that an ambivalent portrait of India is produced. A swift medley of images shows youthful Bal Thackeray heartening his followers, protesting the influence of non-Marathi people in the newly formed Maharashtra. Later in the film, Sukhdev shows, and this is a very interesting moment in the film. Later in the film, Sukhdev shows images of a man scavenging through a garbage dump, foregrounded with the deep, resonant voice of the Marxist Urdu poet K.P. Azmi, narrating the poem "Roz Padhta Hoon Jahan Se Aage." The invocatory insertion of a card-carrying Communist Party of India member, a trade union organizer, a key member of Progressive Writers Group, and a well-known lyricist of Hindi films underscores the political subtext of the film. A gesture not unusual for a filmmaker who was actively involved who was actively flirting with narrative film, feature film world of Hindi cinema, where left-leaning directors, actors, lyricists affiliated with IPTA and people, the Progressive Writers Group, played significant creative roles since the 1940s. The political subtext of the film is fused with a tempered scorn. It is further exacerbated by an elegant, and this is a very interesting moment. When I saw it, I was almost kind of shocked. It's this brilliant self-reflexive moment in this film, probably the first time in Indian documentary film, I think. In an elegant self-reflexive move by Sukhdev, he appears in the documentary as himself, a suave urban subject returning to his ancestral homestead in rural Punjab. It's a village in the Ludhiana district. He arrives in an ambassador car, the automotive symbol of post-colonial industrialization, wearing casual trousers, a t-shirt, adorning a fedora, with a still camera lazily slung over. Greeted by his elderly aunt, a devout Sikh with kripan dangling by her waist, Sukhdev seems estranged and distant, but nostalgically explores the burnt brick ancestral house till he reaches a wall full of photographs. The film cuts from images of his uncle, of family members, to the framed lithograph of the Sikh Guru and Gandhi, and finally settles on his own photograph of receiving the National Award from the President of India, S. Radhakrishnan. Probably, and I'm not sure, I need to ask Shabdam about it, but I think it is probably soon after Miles to Go, but I'm not sure, which he gingerly peers at. And this is my point. By deliberately nestling his accomplishment in a temporal genealogy that is ancient in an antiquated spatiality that tentatively coexists with modern subjectivity, that Sukhdev consciously places himself as an ambivalent product of the identical teleology that he's critical of what's happened in India. This self-effacing biographic insertion is a mimesis of his own nation's struggle that he's capturing in his celluloid narrative. The ambivalent trajectory of India into modernity is mirrored by his own uncertain relationship with his living past. Subsequently, in the scene, he comes across a charpai, checks for dirt in disdain, and stares indifferently at a pillow embroidered sweet dreams in Roman script. He then indulges in a disaffected conversation with his animated arm. Sukhdev masterfully invokes the rhetorical motive emblematic of the film. Post-colonial modernity, contemptuous of tradition, but incapable of liberating itself from its primordial grasp. The meta-narrative of the film is made impressively poignant by this self-reflexive and autocritical subtext that Sukhdev very smartly, I think, inserts in the film. By placing himself as an object of the same derision that he's leveling against the nation, he accentuates the ambivalence that he's sarcastic about. The contempt he has for the nation is located in his own self-reflexive condescension. He does not distinguish himself from the nation. He sees himself similarly a flawed product of an imperfect nation he's reproachful of. It is this ambivalent subtext that the documentary's tropological impetus rests on. The critique of the nation rests on Sukhdev's autocritique.